Happy Friday, everybody. We are live again with Bioactive Q&A here with Brian from Rubber Ducky Isopods, Kevin from OK Calyx and OK Calyx Genetics, and then we got Chris today from Country Roots Ltd.com. Great to have you, Chris. Chris and I have known each other for a couple years now, and we've been working together for a couple years now. I carry a lot of the products that he offers, which are super unique products, stuff that you don't really find. They're mostly homegrown products. Some of the inputs that he puts into his things, his FPJs, and I will get into all that stuff. But a lot of the stuff that he uses, he grows at home, he forages for around home, or he sources locally. So it's really a very cool setup that Chris has going on over at the Country Roots Farm here in Michigan. Um, Welcome to the show, Chris. Great to have everybody back here Friday. Thanks for coming back, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, guys. I got to say that I appreciate this show. I like to pop in and hear what you guys are talking about, and it really keeps good natural farming discussions moving, seeing it from around the country and how people are doing things in different states and stuff is very exciting as well.
And keeping it palatable and keeping ourselves approachable, I think, is really important. Which is one of the reasons I love you, Chris, is that you've never come off as a know-it-all, but you're definitely someone that knows a lot. You have a geology background, which is what you went to school for. That's what you teach in a university setting. Um, so kind of to kick it off, like, why don't there's so much about you, just a little tidbit, but why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what Country Roots is all about, because I don't think I can say it as eloquently.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Chris, and I'm the owner of Country Roots. Started this, with a vision behind it right from the get go. I was following the cannabis community as a basic alias in the past, and was watching a lot of people grow and was watching a lot of things go down. And my background is a geologist, and I do a lot of different water and soil surveys around the state and other states, and just done a lot of like overall health characterization projects and as well as contaminations and like dealing with people mostly in the environmental world is dealing with contaminants and how you can clean up and remediate the soil. So I kind of just strategically I had some friends and some people pushing me before I even started Country Roots that I should try to apply my knowledge in the soil health industry towards the cannabis community, and really wanted to do that for some time, and just kind of found my way in, and just started off with Country Roots. And in the beginning, I was really just kind of promoting natural soil building practices and doing ferments and basic things like that. And it's over the years it's just evolved to something even bigger, where I'm doing larger scale farming projects, larger scale input projects, larger scale um, worm casting and composting and soil building. Like, there was some strategy behind the brand, but I can say that I did not plan to do all this in the beginning. It's just kind of led me down this path, more and more as I've continued. Um, I overall always just wanted to have a farm and and work these natural farming practices. And so as most natural farmers know, one thing is kind of to the other, and you're trying to develop these closed loop systems and trying to develop a system that works for you, where you're bringing in a variety of components to help your garden thrive. And so over the years I just keep building that up, and it keeps getting larger and larger. And I got all kinds of ideas, I'll say that. I'm very passionate when it comes to crafts, and I'm very passionate when it comes to like doing things naturally and yourself, and building garden spaces, and from doing the inputs to composting. Um it's all just been very intriguing to me. And, some of the future aspirations that I have, I'll just say is a little bit more into like the aquaponic sides of things. I just keep wanting to grow as a farmer and kind of incorporate other pieces of natural farming components into my lifestyle. And there's a variety of benefits to most thing that you're doing. It's you can provide garden components. You can provide things for you to eat and ingest, um, things for my farm animals, things for my worms. Some processes just produce an abundance of things for you to work with in one fashion or another. So I've been trying to just continuously build upon that and keep incorporating new things into my farm.
So, um, I guess let's start since you have like a wide array of offerings. You mentioned vermicompost. I think you offer red wigglers, which are tough, but I always recommend people here in Michigan to go to you because you can deliver locally, and that's the best way to get those worms. But you also do, I think, ship them. You carry also ferments, so like an entire natural inputs line, and that's kind of what I wanted to start talking about because I know that a lot of your farm and a lot of what you do during the spring, summer, and fall is dedicated to producing these inputs to bottle up and send off to other people. Um, can you talk a little bit about that, like that line? Like, so why don't you just take it from there? Like,
Sure. Yeah. I do a variety of fermented, traditional style fermented plants. In the beginning, I was experimenting with doing a lot of individual ferments and trying to work with those and see how they work individually. And kind of quickly realized that I like these different blends and concoctions of materials. And I like to find the things that generally work very well and use them as broad scale. And so that goes with both my ferments and my composting and soil building processes. It's all about, kind of bringing more diversity. Um, so I have this whole strategy throughout the year, where it's interesting lifestyle that I've built up because it is an entire year's worth of work to do, what we're trying to do. And I think that relates to even, the home farmers in some sense because I did this, in my home farm for years before I even had Country Roots. I had a little composting bin and I had some ferment stations and I was building up my garden spaces and I was working with my food scraps in my garden beds. Where you overall had this strategy throughout the year. And like I say, I've just kind of expanded upon that. And so now I'm purposely growing, a variety of greens and a variety of fruits and a variety of dynamic plants and herbs and different things and using them in different concoctions. So some of them I'll use in an FPJ, which is a fermented plant juice. So for there, I like a lot of, lush green, garden variety style vegetables, little bit of squashes in there, some pumpkin in there, a lot of kales and a lot of leafy greens that I like to use overall in there. Um, Leafy greens really, produce a nice, rich, dynamic juice overall. But anything extra, I'll say that I don't eat, that my farm animals aren't going to eat or I'm not going to eat. I just ferment all that down and break it down to, a liquid waste. And so at the end of the year, when things start to die and decay off and it's we've done our pickings, I just go through and chop the rest of it. Some of it, I'll just let die on the garden beds. I don't completely take it all, but I'll take the luscious portions of it. And then it's pretty simple. We just take it off and I got a little lab here and we just chop it all up, mix it with nice natural cane sugars. I don't use a traditional brown sugar. That works really well and I will sometimes use that, but my wife and I just use a real nice organic raw um, cane sugar. I feel like that, is just, probably the most natural and robust type of sugar. I feel like it, really extracts the juice components out of my, fruits and vegetables. But yeah, so I grow an abundance of things and the things that we're not going to eat and the leftover portions of plant material at the end of the season we just chop it all up and I ferment it in like these either 10 or 20-gallon bins, just these blue like water cooler type ferment barrels. I break it all down in there and make my different, juices out of it that way. So part of the thing, with my inputs, I'll say is I don't do a whole lot of advertising on the inputs at all. For one, people can absolutely make these themselves, and I highly encourage everyone to make it themselves. A lot of people like to start with like a leafy green or maybe an aloe ferment. Aloe ferments are very fun and super beneficial for your gardens. Um, the other part is if I was going to do, I would have to ferment quite a bit of plant material through the year to produce, hundreds of gallons of fermented juices, and that overall just say hasn't really been my goal. Um, but I like to do it and I like to talk about it and I do have it available for people. And I always say that not everybody has the means or the abilities to, make these types of inputs and garden feeds. So some of the people that do use them have been, very grateful for them because it does take a lot, to try to forage and find this stuff and, juice it all down. It's a messy process, if you're in an apartment or something like that, or you don't have much of a yard or a garden hose outside, it's really going to make it kind of challenging. Not that you can't do it, absolutely could, but yeah. So first and foremost, I'll say everything that I do it for me first. That might sound kind of selfish, but that's what this is for, right? We're trying to build a dynamic gardening system, and
Well, you're
you know,
also
I try to
sorry not
bring
to
the things that I want.
sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I just had a stupid ADD moment there. Plus you're constantly pulling from your land, right? Like you're pulling, you're growing these things, but you're stripping them down, fermenting them, and it's not always going back to your garden. It's going to someone else's garden. You're sharing that. So you have to keep that process going, right?
Yeah, and keep it at a check. We're a point where, I don't want to completely run out or just have some big drop and, have things sell out quite that fast. That's not, the overall goal of that. The overall goal is just to keep a steady train of a system moving. And yeah, I am limited through the year. I make what I make at the end of the season, and that processes throughout the winter, and then I have what I have in in the spring and the summer. And that's what I was saying. Like I started to get to a second ago is that it is a whole year process of really planning, of growing and producing products, and even with the soil and composting, it's like all summer long. You're trying to produce what you can and get material that you can and build up your garden spaces. And like I say, even before I had Country Roots, I was doing that for my own farm needs, just at a smaller scale, and just over time just built this up. And I still enjoy it and I still actually want to do more. So just it's all about having it happen organically, to a point where I'm not having to over forage and over scrape.
So you mentioned some like some fruits and like gourd vegetables and stuff like that that you put in there. So you and just to kind of break down this product because I do carry it myself. We sell quite a bit of it and people seem to really love it. There's a lot of return customers with this stuff because of the fact that the foresight isn't always there. You get middle of the winter and you need a little bottle, like a little 8 ounce. I can't show you the label because of the green screen behind me, but this is the veg feed. And so there's a veg feed, an early bloom, and a late bloom. Just so when you harvest those things that we talked about, obviously you've got your dynamic greens in there. But you mentioned that you have other, vegetables. Are you harvesting those at certain points, or are you waiting till they're huge? You have a mass um, of organic material, or like do you do it different for each product?
Yeah, it's a good question. It starts about now. I'm already looking around the farm and, up here in mid Michigan, things are just starting to grow. And so there's a lot of things that I grow in my garden. And right now I have nothing in my garden that I've planted, but there's a bunch of stinging nettles growing. All my natural comfrey plants are growing, and a variety of just natural dynamic plants around my property. And so in the earlier parts of the season, I'll be collecting those and fermenting those down. And then in the later parts of the season, I start to get, some of the things that are coming out of my garden. And so I'm just pulling little extractions, multiple times throughout the year. Sometimes you get, a quart of juice, sometimes you get a gallon of juice out of it. But it all adds up to me over time, and I just, store it in a nice, cool, dark place. And I have so many different glass bottles and jars, and of all sorts of sizes, literally hundreds of them that I've, bought and used, and scraped up through the years. And so I'll just, break things down into individual juices, and then I have these stainless steel, like ferment chambers that brewers use, and I mix them all into there, and so that's where they all get mixed up, and that's where it starts to stabilize and balance. That's got the bubbler on top, so it can actually breathe. And I like to let it sit and age in there, and I can watch that bubbler, and once the bubbler dies down, then I know I have a stable product. And so some things are very active, and you have to be very careful about bottling some of these inputs. I'll say that.
That's a really good point, Chris. And because it's not just these FPJs that Chris carries and offers. It's also he has like a shelf stable labs, which is I put it in quotations because that should be taken with a grain of salt because it's still active as hell. But
Yeah, I
these
have
things,
I have
yeah,
disclaimers on my stuff that says if you shake it, you will wear it, So
yeah,
that's one thing that I really want to caution anybody making natural inputs and stuff. You get this synthetic bottle mind, where you want to shake your nutrients. Natural inputs are not to be shaken. I'll say that right now. Some of them you can shake, but you need to know what you're shaking before you go to shake it. And not that it's going to completely explode. It's just like a soda can. You open it up and you're just going to wear it. But it could explode, and I actually have had glass bottles explode, so,
yep,
um, gotta be careful.
yeah. We have I have two. Shipping from here, I've had issues with labs heading to really hot environments where I need to supplement with like a cooling pack, which is ridiculous because that's not how it's really priced, and that's not really what we intend to do. But it's definitely like I'm not going to send a bottle that's going to explode in the mail to somebody. That's not acceptable. So that's one of the tricky things about this because they do come in these awesome glass bottles. I know that sometimes you package them in plastic. It's just kind of whatever makes sense. Really, probably for the temperature. Like coming up here, we
Yeah,
probably
for
yeah,
shipping, I'll say that the plastic, they can allow the bottle to exhale a little bit better than the glass, and the glass doesn't take really any pressure at all before it's just gonna break. The glass bottle can actually bulge and deform a little bit, without breaking. So that's why I feel like shipping with the plastic, makes most sense. Because you don't want to be shipping hazards, and something breaking with glass could hurt somebody, so try to avoid that at all costs.
yeah. So shifting over, so you've got your FPJs, so a veg feed in early bloom and a late bloom. And then you also have like a labs an OHN, a 10-part OHN, which is really cool. It's an OHN with, I think you've got chaga in there and some other really interesting additions. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I just, the traditional 6-part OHN that people use, some people say it's a little bit too bitter, where some people started using like a 3-part OHN where they were only using like the sugary varieties of OHN. I kind of took that a step further and just added some more components. And part of it was to try to round it out and not have it be so bitter and, so like angelic-y and garlicky. That stuff's all great in there, and I still use that in there, of course. But the additional um, hibiscus and mugwort and chaga, they really produce a really nice, smooth type of tincture that's not like overly pungent, and they're super beneficial type materials to work with overall. So I did some experimenting with putting them in there and just really like the way that it makes the OHN. Like I say, I feel like it rounds it out a little bit better, adds a little bit more diversity to it, and it has a nice little sweetness in it. Especially like the hibiscus plant really kind of tames it down to like a more florally spectrum. And hibiscus is super easy to grow for most people if they want to grow that one themselves too. Um,
Kev, Kevin, I'm sorry, just to talk more about OHN here. I know you've got a black and a white OHN. I think that you add a beer into the black. Is that right? Or maybe the white. Are you doing anything with some additions to your OHNs at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to do that. I'm going to start some echinacea. It's called snake root around here. As a kid, we used to dig it up and dry it out and sell it on the by the weight of dry snake root. And I'm going to try some of that because it is around here. I'm sure there's other things around here. I know that I just found some horsetail today. I don't know if you can use horsetail or not in OHM, but that's one thing I'm going to try to use this year. The OHM white is I use vodka and Pabst's Blue Ribbon, and then the OHM black I add turmeric to the same list of things I use, but I use Guinness beer and Bacardi black rum, and it's much darker. That's why.
nice. Yeah, so that's interesting characteristic spins on this. I've also used like gins before. I've used cannabis roots. You can take dried cannabis root and make a dried cannabis root tincture and add that to an OHN if you want to use something like that. But overall, one thing I tell people about natural inputs, like people, ask if there's like specific reasons, and the specific reason to use something is that it's beneficial, right? And so if you know that it has good health substance to it and it's beneficial, then it's a good idea for you to try to figure out how to use that. And so different people, have some different resources around, and so there's room to be creative for sure.
And you're getting a lot of micronutrients through an OHN. So if you just think from a micronutrient standpoint too, mugwort's a dynamic. I believe mugwort's a dynamic accumulator. I can't remember. I know it's a native growing species here in Michigan. Um, Dandelion, adding comfrey, borage. None of that will have an adverse effect. I guess the point is that use what you got, and if you need to adapt that recipe, and if you feel like you can add a little special sauce to it, do your diligence, obviously. But for the most part, I don't think that there's any problem there.
Man, I totally forgot. I did that turkey tail OHN. That was one that I've done and totally forgot to mention. But yeah, there's a question here by Big E. We can get to it in a minute. Real good question. But I did turkey tail ferments because I have a ton of turkey tail. I actually just went out today and I marked, man, I marked 5 or 6 stumps. I added to a turkey tail stack. It's where I find these branches and I can know turkey tail root is, or spores on the bottom just by the look of it. And I'll just keep stacking these sticks together and get these nice, little pile of sticks. And I don't have to go running everywhere. It's all right there. There's more turkey tail out there, but there's plenty of growing the way I find it around stumps and make these little stacks. But yeah, I just fermented it down with a little bit of labs and molasses, and then um, fermented turkey tail extract. That's what I made, and then I did a vodka extract of just straight turkey tail also, and that was what was used in the OHN.
I want to say something about natural inputs too, and I love the turkey tail and all these different things, and like a part of what I see natural inputs is, it's a people ask, is it needed in a living soil system? Do you really need to use these inputs? Is an interesting question that comes in, and to me, absolutely yes. Because you want things that have decayed and broken down, and so the whole thing about fermented plant feeds is that you're taking these beautiful things of nature's different herbs and different roots and different mushrooms and different plants, and you could break them down to a juiced form, and that juiced form, watering it in appropriately into your soil, helps feed the microdiversity and helps keep beneficial nutrients. And this is really what's essential to keeping living soil alive, in my opinion. I wonder about some of these living soil growers that don't use natural inputs, and are they working their soil too hard? Is there's just some things that I wonder about. I'm not trying to pick on anything in particular, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like it's very vital because especially if you're trying to do living soil indoor, there's not a whole lot of plant material and different things that get to come, into that type of a system unless you bring it in. And so, bringing in these ferments really helps keep that soil dynamic and helps keep the diversity, thriving throughout it.
So just real quick before we move forward past OHN, Biggie wanted to know, how do you incorporate mushrooms into OHN? Is it just an alcohol extraction or both water and alcohol?
Yeah, so I use the chaga in mine, and so the chaga is an extremely dry mushroom. It grows on the side of a tree, birch trees, and so it actually is a cancer to the tree. It is killing the tree. But people have been using chaga a long time for, different anti-inflammatory and different health benefits. It's really good for your heart, good for your digestive system, and things like that. And so to being that it's so dry anyways, the traditional way to extract it is through an alcohol-based extraction. And so following the natural farming principles, I hydrate it with a beer first. So I take a fermented beer type of a substance. I actually make my own beers too. So that's why I kind of hesitate on how I want to talk about it. But I'll do different types of beers and put specific types of grains and hops and different things that I might want to have in there. And so I'll use that for my hydration and do a traditional hydration, and then I'll do, a 5-part alcohol extraction from there to get, a full chaga extract.
Same with you, Kev.
Yeah, I knew there was some beer being brewed back there just by the talk of what's going on. I put that. I feel like there's some beer and some kombucha brewing out there. If you like all
Yeah,
that
totally.
fun.
That's a big part of what got me into the ferments is because I was really big into brewing beer. And
Exactly.
so I was like, wow, I could actually brew my own garden inputs and make things
Yeah.
like that. And immediately, started switching, sides. And I don't make nearly as much. I'm lucky to make, one batch of beer now when I used to be making, for years, I was making probably, maybe 50 batches a year. I
Yeah.
was doing quite a bit. And I had a lot of friends and stuff, and I just give these beers out to people. I wasn't even drinking them all, but I just had a big infatuation with when it was with the craft beer boom, in the 2000s, all of a sudden craft beer became a thing, and I just initially was drawn onto that. And I've tried to brew every type of beer you could imagine, done different brewing competitions and things like that too. So
Nice.
definitely try to incorporate that into my natural farming, lifestyle.
That's fantastic because it does go totally together. So I had an alcohol problem. I don't drink anymore, but I did brew my own beer, made my own wines and all the fun stuff. I never distilled anything like that, but it was all just the ferments. And this was before all the natural farming stuff happened in my life. It was before cannabis was legal in Oklahoma, but I was fascinated with it. But me and my friend, we used to make it in high school. We got caught making it by his parents in high school at his house one time. We had it in his room. We had grapes fermenting with yeast and sugar. Had no idea what we were doing, man, but it was so smelling really good. And we got caught. But then we did it at college with just apple cider with frozen grape juice and yeast, and just experimenting. And I've loved it forever. And it is, guys. If you guys do drink beer, you should look into making your own beer. It's such a fun process of messing with microbiology yet again, and uh, an edible process. Whereas JLF isn't so edible, but these beers and these yeasts and these different types of lagers and ale bacterias and things that are getting in there, they make fantastic things, and it's so fun. So anyway, I knew you had to be brewing a little bit because if you didn't, I was going to say start brewing.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So I've kind of, like I say, just transitioned it to trying to, grow a lot of things and produce a lot of different things that I could use for these different ferments and inputs. Um, and then the other things that I do is, for the worm castings that we can talk about, the composting process, if you will, want to a little bit too.
Yeah, let's real quick before we move on from this kind of natural inputs. The other thing, so obviously you're not raising or growing chaga in your greenhouse. You know what I mean? So like you say chaga and you use a lot of chaga, and many people on this chat right here, they're gonna have to go online to get chaga because you don't have chaga growing in your hemisphere or your latitude or whatever the requirements are, because it only grows in certain areas of the world. And so before you obviously forage for stuff like that, what other stuff do you do for your natural inputs? Because I know you have a water soluble calcium and potassium that has bone char. Like, where is that coming from?
Yeah, great question. So, things that I forage for like a lot of natural like rhubarb borage plants. Um, I forage a lot of different horsetails. Chaga actually grows very well around the forest where I'm at. I'm up here in the state forest lands in mid Michigan, so it's in the Hiawatha National Forest System. So it's literally thousands of miles of just natural forest lands around me. And I got, a little side by side that I like to adventure on, and I just kind of cruise around the woods and just look for, different spots to go hike back into and take a look at and find different things. And so, I could find a lot of different plants around, and as well as some of the mushrooms and things. But I will say some of the things that I have to buy is like, for the herbal nutrients, I have to buy the angelica root, I buy cinnamon bark, and so some of these things that you have to buy, I'll say just seek out an organic source or some sort of a natural source is the way that I go about that. Some of the stuff like cinnamon, it typically comes from China, so they're growing a lot of cinnamon over there in China, and they mark it as organic. And some of these things, I have no reason to believe that they would be lying. I know that they like to use organic farming principles in, a lot of these other countries as well. But yeah, just trying to seek out things like that and try to find, reliable bulk source for the things that, you can't forage for in the area to kind of fill some of the gaps that you might find. Because I've never seen a cinnamon tree in Michigan. That would be, I'd have to, it's interesting. I've never even seen a cinnamon tree, honestly, but you could get the cinnamon bark that's pretty big. So it obviously grows, to be a decent size, um, you know, main stalk and branches. Um, but now it's always funny when you get to talking about something and you get to thinking about something you never seen, but a cinnamon tree.
So, moving over to composting.
Or
Why don't
sorry, you asked another question about
well,
the calcium and yeah. So the other part is I'm a hunter, and so part of my background there is that I was raised with a grandfather that was very close into hunting, and he taught me not to waste things, and and that I have to eat my kill and utilize my kill. And so when I got into the natural farming world, I realized there's some more things that I could do with the harvest that I have. And so for like my calcium phosphate, I'll actually take, the deer bones, and I'll take the deer skull and even the teeth from the deer. I take the whole deer and I'll bury it. And if you bury it and you bury it deep enough, the microorganisms, all the different bacteria and fungi, and little centipedes and millipedes and roly polies and all these different bugs, they will go to town on that deer carcass. And come springtime, if you bury it in a decent spot that has good biology, come springtime, there'll be no meat left on them bones. You'll have bare bones, bare skull that you can dig up. And then I just spray it all off with a hose. And then I can char that bone matter up. I even take the teeth and, got a little smashing pad, and I'll smash the teeth up and char all that up with the bones and everything. And then I can, do a little bone phosphate extraction from that.
So tell us your char process real quick, would you?
Yeah, so I like to work over open fire. I find that just trying to find a big open fire system, and find yourself a nice big char pot of a sorts. A big tough pot that can take big open fire. And then I'll just char it in there. For typically it takes about 30 minutes to an hour. Get it nice and charred up.
You got lid
Um,
closed on it, right? Lid sealed on it somehow.
yeah, for part of the time. Especially with the bone. If you're doing like egg char, I don't use a lid for the eggshells because is there a specific reason for the bone? I use a lid because it helps to actually cook the bone thoroughly. You got to get it. Bone is kind of soft. It actually does have some sponginess to it, and so you really got to get it to a point where it's absolutely brittle. if you're going to try to char a bone. And so I have to put the lid on there for a piece and just to kind of, build up that heat and cook it out. But versus the eggshells and things that are, more fragile like that, they burn up really, really easy. The other thing that you can do is um, tobacco stems. I'll grow some tobacco plants and I'll ferment the leaves on the tobacco plants, and those actually get put into my IPM mixture. The IPM that I make has some of the tobacco leaves in it, and then it has a bunch of different mints and spearmints and some garlic in it, some clove in there, some different types of pungent things that are natural pest deterrents. And they're you look at a lot of the common ingredients in a lot of these IPMs, and a lot of it is mints and things like that, lemons, lemongrass, fermented lemongrass, fermented lemons, fermented limes, fermented
Timol.
peppermint, spearmint, thymol, all these bitter, even bitter herbs, herbs that are super bitter, spearmints and like basil, things like that. If I have, you can't eat all that stuff, it's like you get a whole big plant and you pick a couple of leaves, if you, unless you're making seasonings, which is something, I want to do more, quite frankly, myself is, start to dehydrate some things to make some more seasonings and things too, because it just sounds fun. That's something I haven't done a whole lot of. But that's what all goes in the IPM is, a lot of the bitter stuff. But anyways, I was talking about the tobacco stem, and the tobacco stem, if you get a nice big long tobacco stem, you strip the leaves off and ferment those. And the stem, I just let that dry naturally and it turns into a dry stock. And then you can char that and do, a little tobacco stem in your phosphate as well.
Yeah, that's good. We do the same with sunflower stems. Let them dry in the sun, get hard, and then put them in open fire. The reason I ask about a lid is I was just trying to get the listeners a picture of what it looks like when you're doing it. You got a barrel with a lid on it over an open fire, that kind of a thing. Because every time I see people do it, a char that's a little more involved than I want to do. They always got two cans going on or something like that, and one sealed and got wood around the inner one, and just things like that. I mean, I'm sure there's many ways to char. I don't haven't done it many ways. I've kind of done it the way you've done it, and the other way is just make a big hot fire, and when the coals are red, dump the water on it immediately, and then pull some char pieces out like that. But there's no reason for a lid, like you said, with those eggshells. Just let them just dehydrate out in that heat, and they just get brittly. You're talking about compost, though. How much compost can you make in a year, Chris?
Um, I'm trying to do 1,000 yards, quite frankly. That's the goal, if I'm being honest. Right now, I'm only
That's
able to do a couple hundred, but I'm trying to step up. And by next year, I'm trying to figure out how I can do 1,000 yards is my goal.
So if you're lucky enough to live in the state of Michigan, um, I not the whole state of Michigan, obviously, but within reason, Chris is the kind of guy who has the capabilities to deliver this soil. So, and he has the customer service and the quality that if you're lucky enough to live in this region, this area, you can get it a much better quality product for a lot less than having to pay for all the shipping. Um, do you offer your soils shipped online? Is that something you even try to delve into at the crazy cost that it is?
Yeah, it's another thing I don't really advertise very often or at all because I just feel bad for people that have to buy, the soil and pay for the shipping. Anything that's, weighted like that, it's pretty much costs, exact same amount for the soil as it costs to ship it. And in some places like California, it actually costs more money to ship it than I would sell you the soil for. And so it just makes me feel bad. But I do have it on my website and people will buy bags, and they will pay the shipping. It's surprising to me, but some people don't have great resources around. Um, but I will say if you're at all handy as a soil builder, the other thing that I do is worm castings and compost and mineral blends and so there's a lot of other great companies that have other great things too. And so, from there, you just need, some sort of a peat source or maybe, you're making your own compost at home. But there's things that I could sell you that, you only need a little bit of, and you could add to your garden spaces to enrich them and to get more out of your soil. Like particularly peat. If you could buy yourself some peat, I could help you with minerals and vermicompost, and it's a lot cheaper because the peat is the majority of the weight. So it depends on people's, abilities and resources.
And that ties right into this question here from David Graff. I figured it was appropriate time to bring that up. I saw it earlier. Um, how do you start a compost? What things do you incorporate? So you use peat. You like peat over cocoa as kind of your base. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for my soils, I like peat, but I'm actually getting more into the cocoa as well because I recognize it as a byproduct that has a use, and peat. I'm very sensitive about peat shortages, as a soil builder. I quite frankly wonder in a couple of years if I'm even going to be able to get it, because it just seems like they're mining peat at a crazy rate. And, we've seen shortages, and I've definitely heard about shortages in my business. And so, you want to be more strategic than being completely reliant on peat. But peat's great, and it's a great soil component. Um, the last thing I'll just say about that, for me, soil use is about, the life of the soil. If you just want to make a peat soil that's a one and done and people are going to get rid of it, that's a shame. But, we're obviously trying to promote people bring in these resources to their garden spaces and they plan to use them forever. It's not going anywhere, and so that's a principle that I want more and more people to attach to, because it will be much more friendly on our resources around us if we can, incorporate that mentality.
So if you're trying to be more mindful, go with a cocoa base, because as Chris said, it's a byproduct of the coconut industry, and it's regenerative in and of itself. It's a renewable resource. Peat is not as quickly renewed. It takes a long, long time, and it's being basically dug out of the ground, which makes it not as mindful if you use it. So if you're not really that concerned, I agree with you, Chris, on peat. I love peat. I've started using a lot more coconut just because it's a lot cheaper, and I'm figuring out how to use it as effectively. But like you said, it's not necessarily probably going to be as good on a longevity scale. So first step is that base. So peat or coconut, regardless of what you use. Then what would you recommend going from there with starting a compost?
Yeah, good question. Composting for me mainly starts with the manure source. And so, I have rabbits and alpaca. And so my alpaca are my main drivers of my compost for the most part. And so I kind of start my composting process based on how much manure I got, and available to use. And then from there, I don't want just a manure based compost. I want, a variety of broken down materials, just like I do with all my inputs and all my sources. And so I want a variety of leaf sources. I want a variety of, some wood chips and some different stick sources. I like to use spent mushroom blocks. I get from mushroom growers. They harvest the mushrooms off of the blocks, and they don't like to get a second fruit out of them because the second fruit doesn't fruit as good as the first one, and it could be, a little bit more contaminated, so they just get rid of them. And so, we can compost those down. And so from my garden, I take a variety of plant materials and some of the things that I don't get to fermenting because it's a lot of work to chop all that up and, put the sugars on it and extract it all. And so everything else gets put into the compost pile, but the manure drives it. And so you don't need manure for compost. That's another thing I like to explain to people. A lot of people think compost strictly is manure, and so you can compost without manure if that's what your, preference is. But you got to get a variety of browns and greens in there because compost has to heat up. It has to get dynamic. Um, Otherwise, it just takes longer. I guess it doesn't have to heat up. It just, other things traditionally will take, a couple of years to break down versus the thermophilic process of heating it up allows us to, heat it up throughout the winter and turn it a few times and then we can use it in the spring. And so I mainly go off of a thermophilic, based composting process. And so I call my compost a compost blend. And you already hear me kind of rambling about all these things that I use in there. And that's why I call it a compost blend, because, I'm putting a variety of things in there and having that all break down. And my overall goal for compost is I want that when it's done breaking down, whether I do it thermophilic or just a slow breakdown, I want that to, have as much soil components as I possibly can have in it, and as much nutrient diversity as I can have in it. I don't want it to be, some compost can be like just screaming hot in potassium, and it doesn't have much nutrient in it other than potassium or maybe even a phosphate. And you really want to kind of avoid a compost that just has really high of anything. You want it to have more of a balance, so that it's more of a dynamic component. And so I feel like bringing in all these extra components and having that breakdown with your manure source. Manure is only 50% of my compost, and it probably isn't even quite 50. Sometimes it's 50, sometimes it might be only 30 or 40% of it. Just depends on how much other stuff get added in there. Um, and so it's quite a process for me, but just gathering materials through the year, and building a new pile, and starting a new pile, and turning old piles, and breaking it down. And I take my compost and I also use that in my worm farming. And I build another whole worm bedding. Some people just use the compost or various things for the worm farm, but I take that compost and I put some paper in there, some extra biochar in there, and I put some extra leaf matter in there. I even take cocoa core. Now the last year, I've been putting some cocoa in there. And that's because I don't want to use peat in my worm castings. I'll use peat with the soil blending process. But the cocoa does help fluff it up, and the worms seem to appreciate the cocoa in the worm bedding. And so, I kind of mix the worms a soil that I think that they really love, and then I let the worms live in that soil for 3 months to a year. It just depends on. I have some bigger piles and some smaller piles, some bins, some totes. It works in a variety of different ways. But like the bigger pile, I have a mother pile that's been going for a few years now, and I just kind of keep adding to it. People don't get to buy anything from my mother pile. That's just for me to work off of. I just pull from it and build my bins, and actually do the majority. If you buy anything from me, it's actually completed indoors. The composting process starts outside and it goes through, all these varieties of materials, composting. And then, like I say, I mix this worm bedding, or like a soil that the worms love. And then I have these big giant beds and bays and bins and smaller totes. It works, like I say, whatever size. And then I just let my worms thrive in there for 3 to 6 months, and then I sort that out, and that's my premium worm casting at that point.
And Chris isn't sorry, he's not shy about sharing this stuff. If you're interested in seeing what it is that he's talking about, go follow him on Instagram at Country Roots Ltd. Um, Another one of those people to follow. When he has time, he's dropping little gold nuggets of knowledge for people. That's why having an hour with you is just kind of like so valuable, because you're such a busy guy. Pulling this information out of you is so it's just, it's everything you say is I'm drinking it up. So um, let's get into some questions, boys. We have 10 questions. Um,
Yeah,
Brian, you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. The first one from Stone Mason. Hey guys, I'm building some new beds. What do you think of mix of compost, peat moss, wood chips? The wood chips are soaked in IMO 4, KNF maintenance solution, and FAA.
Well, I always say don't forget your minerals with your organics. You got a lot of organics, and that's all beautiful source material. And you could be getting all of your mineral resources from there, but if you're not doing testing, you still could be steering it, one way or another. And for one, a lot of these materials don't have a lot of calcium in them. And so calcium is very essential in your soil. And so the most important mineral I think to add to that mix is some calcium type minerals. So I like to use gypsum and wollastonite. Um, so that'll really balance that out. You're for sure going to have a bunch of PKs in there, and if you get the dynamics going, you know, the fungal and the bacterial diversity will raise the nitrogen in there and provide plenty of good nitrogen, especially with the FAA. But I'm just seeing a little ad for calcium. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think adding a little, in my opinion, coral calcium. I've noticed that in the cannabis world and now in my little isopod world, that is quite a difference in the quality of the calcium that the microbial life seems to break down. So there might be something to that by going above and beyond just kind of the normal, especially like I like oyster shell flour for that as well. So diversity is king when it comes to calcium as well as the microbial life.
Yeah, and a
Calcium's
low calcium soil is going to be a tough one to grow in. You can grow in it, but you're going to have a constant calcium source in your feed, most likely. Um, you know, I experiment out here too. I'll say I have straight sand that I grow in, and so I've tried to grow plants, and if you're feeding them and nursing them, you know, you absolutely can. So just it's where being a gardener comes in. You know, most people are aware and they can start to kind of read signs from their plants, and they start to pick up different things and feed them.
Uh, uh, I was gonna ask Kevin, but then you started. Do you have
Well,
anything to add
yeah,
to that? Yeah.
all I've really gone to, guys, is using my JLF constantly, and then using some seawater, just a dash, a little bit of seawater, as kind of a mineral. I used to use some rock dust and different things like that, but I've tried to get to just a very minimalistic way of gardening. And if it works for me, it's working. And I mean, I put many other things in there, but it's always those things right there that that I go to. Some fermented plant extract also. I like that, because the reason I've been liking it is because of the simplicity of it. I make the rice and the labs all go together. That whole IMO1 and labs thing go together, and then growing anything like you said, tobacco, which I'd love to grow some of that. Sunflowers here, cannabis here. Um, what else? Some big like mustard head, radishes head, like you said, leafy greens, things like that. Making FPEs with it and using that because it's such a closed loop system. It's so easy. It doesn't cost anything. It's just the fun of working with the organic methods, and but a little bit of seawater seems all I've been bartering for seawater. Genetics for the guys to send me some seawater from wherever they are, whatever side of the country they're on.
Yeah, so I bet you're getting a lot of calcium from the seawater. You know, that's definitely pretty rich in seawater. And then also JLFs and things like that. You know, calcium is the main building block of a lot of plants. So I'm sure you're getting a lot of calcium out of there. JLF is something that I've only experimented with a little bit. I kind of, just do it a little bit in the summertime because it's more convenient to do it. But I love the principles of all of it. It's hard to utilize it all. And one thing as a natural farmer too is like, at some point you have too many tools in the bag, it's like how many tools do you need, so I try to minimize my tool pouch a little bit too. And so that's where I think some of these JLF style and the net and the fermented farmers and some of them just kind of stay where they're at or whatever.
Our next question from Big E: do you ferment the food you feed to your animals?
Yeah, some for my chickens. The chickens particularly, like to eat, some of the things that are, broken down and fermented a little bit. But the alpaca that I have, they really like it fresh. But I'm definitely thinking more and more in the future of how I'm going to feed my animals with different things and fermented foods, even for the alpaca. I'm sure it can be done in a positive manner that they would really like, and I think it would be really good for them. Farm animals don't necessarily get a lot of diversity. If they're like corralled, they're kind of stuck to whatever you bring them sometimes. And so I feel like incorporating more fermented foods will probably be better. Help them with their digestive health and just make them a little bit healthier overall. So something that I want to do more for all my livestock here, and you'll definitely see me experimenting more.
From Roots and Music, is it more beneficial to do a foliar spray with ferments or a soil drench?
I don't do a whole lot of foliar sprays, but I do them, throughout the plant cycle. I like to hit them a couple of times. It's kind of strategy for me with foliars in the sense that, I also want to do some IPM and, some pest deterrent, and then I want to do something that's fully beneficial. And so, well, kind of the way I like to work is if I do a couple of different pest deterrent types of foliars, then the next week I like to hit them with a beneficial one just because I was hitting them, a couple of times with something else. And so I like to follow up there. But mostly I'm soil drenching for sure. But beneficial foliars throughout it's like my indoor crop. I'll only give them a beneficial foliar like 3 or 4 times throughout the life of the plant. Outdoor crops, I'll foliar them more often than that for sure. But it's just different strategies.
Yeah, and I would caution people with going crazy with spraying your plants with a bunch of different things if you're brand new to a lot of this. A very simple one we've talked about beforehand was just Epsom salts. It's got to be the agricultural Epsom salts, and you need a surfactant. So we like to use yucca extract for that, and that is something that is very easy that you can make the plants kind of like prey up. You can add a little bit of calcium to that. In my opinion, if you have the funds, I would do it with an atomizer so that the water molecules are smaller, especially when you're using the surfactant. And remember to clean that unit. That was another thing that I saw a lot of people when they got into the teas and this kind of stuff, spraying their plants constantly with the microbial world, is that they wouldn't clean things out. So eventually things start to smell to high heaven. So if you want to go this route, just remember that cleanliness is important with the teas. Otherwise, you could be brewing some nasty stuff, put it on your plants, and potentially have issues or kill those plants.
Yeah, good point. If you're comfortable and like, oh, that's why I say indoors, you definitely don't want to overspray. That can, cause some different problems for your plants. But strategically, like I said, I like to do the IPMs right before flower. And then, that first day of flower, I usually hit them with a beneficial foliar, just send them off into flower. And so a beneficial foliar to me is, you can use a little bit of FPJ, a little, a nice extracted plant juice with a little herbal nutrients and some calcium source. So I'll either use a little bit of gypsum in there or my water soluble calcium phosphate. And I like to just foliar feed them once or twice, but that's it. But it does definitely help them, and it'll help them perk right up. You can prevent that sickness when they're going into flower. You don't want your plants to lose any steam. You don't want them to turn red at all, in that first week. You want them to actually thicken up and get more vibrant green into that first week of flower. That's what really shows you. If you can accomplish that goal of, keeping the robustness and enhancing upon the robustness of the plant into the first week of flower, you're sailing right off to the end for the most part, as long as you don't screw anything up. But if you do too much to harm them in the beginning and stress them into flower, then it's harder to get them out of that, and it's harder to finish, that robust plant.
These are excellent answers, by the way.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
really good. We talked about that before. The best thing for a good flower is to have a great veg plant going into it. Good, healthy, green, bushy, thick, strong veg plant ready to switch into flower. You're gonna be all right. Like he said, set selling into flower with that good veg plant. I don't even have if I have bad veg plants, they don't even go into flower anymore. It's just like nope, nope, nope. I already know what's gonna happen.
Hmm.
the next question from Slick Nick. I've heard people say they can taste the ferments in the smoke. What do you guys think?
Nope, never have. I taste the terp in the smoke. That's what I taste.
I've never heard that before, to be completely honest. So I'd have to I'd have to know. And maybe what they're talking about is that like super high bricks. I don't know what the possible, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the
AKA
only misnomer.
a strong fish amino acid taste. That'd be
Yeah,
a
it
tough.
might have been the strain of cannabis they were smoking was just dead fish.
I mean,
Yeah,
here,
I mean, even with natural inputs, it's like I don't want to call it a flush at all, but you got to have a finish time on your plants. So those last 3 weeks particularly, you shouldn't have to feed it anything FAA or anything. Herbal nutrients, definitely cut that one out. But I have a late bloom, and the late bloom feed is just fermented fruits, and so that one right there, if you're not overfeeding a bunch of things, you can get all the way to the end. And I don't know, I pull great flavors out of my flowers, and people always comment that, like, wow, this tastes like a whole meal or something, like you could just really taste, some dynamic flavors inside of your plants. And it's not the extracts, it's just bringing out natural medicines, and natural vibrant flavors from your soil and your feeding program. And, you know, it could just overall enhances the flower flavor and, gives you some good pungent meds, and they smoke very wholesome. That's one thing that I say too. Like some 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 herbs, they smoke too light, like it burns really quickly. You hit it and it's, you know what I mean, and it's just burning right in. And so, a nice soil rich, you know, um, my herbs smoke pretty slow. For the most part, they burn very clean, very slow, and full of flavor. That's what I think you want.
yeah,
We
yeah, Slick
spoke on
Nick.
this.
I think the one thing Slick Nick has brought up is if you have good organic soil, you're definitely going to taste a good terpy plant, a good terpy bud and flower when it's dried, when it's cured, when it's in flower rosin, hash rosin. Yeah, if it's in a good soil, I'm not saying that there's not good soil grown in salts either, because there is. I've smoked many of it. My friends do it, but my strains and the things I grow, I've had it. Uh, we've grew it out at Legends Cannabis Company many times, and I grew those strains out at my house. Big difference. My soil makes it much more terpy. The blueberry work that I did, that's what we did. And here in the soil stuff is it's better. So Slick Nick, you bet. But dude, the idea is, can you taste the ferments in the smoke? Yep, but not like tasting the fish amino acid or the labs or the whatever. You're gonna have a good terpy bud, meaning you had good inputs, organic methods, things like that. It just has a better result.
I'll
We
say
were
I've definitely tailored back. When you first start gardening and even in natural farming, people feel a constant need to feed things, and so they don't do a whole many water only days and things like that. And so it's a dynamic process. I mean, it depends on what your soil is, how much soil and what the nutrient content of your soil. There's a lot of variables in there. But for the most part, if you got your system active, you shouldn't have to like constantly be feeding it, even ferments. And so, for the most part, I stick to, a once a week feeding, and the rest of it is for the most part water only. And if I veer from that, it's just a little bit of a light calcium ferment or a little bit of fermented plant juice. It's not gonna hurt it at all. But the same point is sometimes too much is too much. You're just using things for no reason. And so
A little,
that's where some of the
little
experience
too much
comes
is
into it.
way too much often. Sorry, Nick. Or not Nick, but Chris. Yeah,
Yeah, so
sometimes.
just learning to read your plants and not overdo it is a big part of the skill that gets into gardening.
I was fortunate to sit at the table with like Frenchy Cannoli and Leo Stone, and we were in California. And we were tripping. They were talking about the plan that this was brought up, and one of the things that they were kind of like going real deep on was they feel like when you can, or in that time frame, when you can really taste it in the smoke, that means that the grower has gone real heavy in some kind of nitrogen source. And I wanted to get your guys' opinion on that because it does seem like if somebody's newer to growing, they do go really heavy on a lot of nutrients. The nitrogen is affecting the flower, especially if it's being put in like after into the flower. And so and I guess we are kind of like chopping it up, trying to understand that. And I just wanted your thoughts on that, I guess, Chris, on what, like, do you think that most of the time when you're tasting cannabis and you can like have that like pungent pullness in your throat, that usually that's from overfeeding some kind of nitrogen source?
Yeah, absolutely. And you always want to avoid having to do any sort of a nitrogen dump or over nitrogen feed, a panic of, oh God, we got to get a bunch of nitrogen in there by any means. And so that's something that I've rounded out over the years is I never use anything of strong nitrogen period anymore. And I used to think that you had to. I absolutely thought you had to back before. Um, and that's the weird thing with living soil too. Even like I used in growing indoor beds, cycle after cycle after cycle for, years. On my 16th run in a couple of these beds. And you don't ever have to put anything strong nitrogen in there, and the plants are always lush green. But the answer is to keeping the biology thriving, because as long as you have a biologically active system and a biologically active bed, there's going to be small little nitrogen fixation components in your soil. And so you want to keep that nitrogen fixation process moving. And so you keep that moving by having, regular timed top feeds and little teas. You don't have to use teas, but you have to be offering something to the soil every so often, especially if you're, running a regenerative soil. And so top feeds could be just more compost or more organic material to break down. It could be mineral feeds, could be, I use brass, bokashi, all these different things. But,
Benny
having
Boost.
Benny Boost, yeah, absolutely. All these light things just keep the microdiversity working and active in your soil. And as long as that's thriving in your soil, you don't ever have to use anything strong nitrogen. So you shouldn't have to ever burn your plants to begin with in the first place.
That's, in my opinion, that's next level stuff if you're brand new to this, because a lot of people, if you go on the internet, you start dumping these plants with the living soil like alfalfa meal. You get crazy with the meals, and then you're making the teas, and you're finding out about extracts, and all of a sudden you just dump so much stuff on here that you burn the shit out of your plants. You've destroyed the fancy soil that you've purchased. So I like this conversation today because I think more people are starting to realize that this is a real chess game. And you don't necessarily always make your moves completely without thinking the things through. And what Chris is kind of getting at is I think a lot of the early cannabis farmers using the living soil systems, they did go really heavy with, even with the kelps, and not, going kind of cheap in a way with some of those kelps, and then they would get heavy metal issues. And so there's a lot of chess moves with the living soil system. And if you keep it real basic, especially at first, you're going to find success. You're going to have a little more money in your pocket. And, we've talked about this, like, several times throughout the years, that back in the day, the forums was the only place that you would find this kind of information. So to be able to pick Chris's brain in real time and have Kevin back it up and have Mark asking these fantastic questions is really something to behold. And I'm proud to be able to sit here with you boys tonight and talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
sure we'll have more good conversations to come for sure. You guys, like I say, I appreciate you guys keeping these conversations going, keeping people educated on this, because that's what it's all about. There's a big organic shift right now, and people are trying to figure this out. And us living soil growers that are growing in the same soil year and year and year, is intriguing to people. But until they learn how to do it, they're not going to make that shift. And but we're leading by great examples. So keep it up, guys.
Yep, I agree.
3 Puff Pass. Do you guys have any tips on feeding and flower? I've used a ton of different slow release organic bloom feeds, but as far as any KNF or Jajam inputs that you guys have used during flower successfully.
Again, JLF covers it all. If you got a good JLF going, if you got about an 8-month-old JLF that you've been packing a barrel full of, or green lushy materials, food scraps, things like that. After about 8 months of breaking down, you're going to be ready to use about 3 quarts of it to a 5-gallon bucket when you feed. Is what I would do. Right now, I've got about a 2-year-old, a little over 2-year-old JLF, and I'll use 2 quarts of that to a 5-gallon bucket, basically for anything. That's what I used when I grow inside, is that ratio of JLF. But I totally understand if you don't have JLF, you got to start using something else. The KNF methods for me are too much. I use too much sugar, too much steps and measurements and things like that. But again, my method's been boiled down really to JLF, a little bit of FPE, and my IMO3 and good compost. And that's really all that I'm needing right now.
Fermented feeds, I would say, I follow, a natural spectrum of nature. And so in the early part of the season, I like to use ferments that were rich, very, very lush and full of life. And then my late bloom feed is actually a bunch of overripened berries and things like that. So I pick a bunch of blueberries and raspberries and blackberries and even some peaches and things like that, that I can get from, either my farm or good source in the area. I like to use those in the fruits. I think they really enhance the flavor of your flower, using those fruits in those middle to later stages of the flowering cycle. Um, they can, enhance some flavor and bring, some good aromas, to the profile. And so that's my overall strategy. And, there's a variety of materials that people can use to do that as well.
I would
That's what I
almost
love about your products, Chris. Sorry, Brian, real quick. That's what I love about your products is they're well thought, mindfully made with, the early bloom is going to have things that are in transition, under ripened fruits and stuff like that. So anyways, sorry, Brian.
I just wanted to say that this is the kind of fuck, now I did lose my train of thought. Sorry about that, fellas.
My bad.
It's all good. This has been an excellent conversation, and I think if more people are starting to get into this and want to understand more of this kind of stuff, uh, all these gentlemen's Instagrams kind of go above and beyond. And I know Mark's website itself, a lot of the like rove beetles and dealing with gray isopods and that kind of stuff is a fairly quick read to try to understand stuff that could potentially have drastic impacts on your grows. And so what these guys are sharing with you today, I hope that you're hearing that it's a slow and grow process. Your perpetual harvests are going to pay for this knowledge, and then you're going to eventually get it to where you're going, like every flip is cheaper and cheaper. And I saw somebody say that they went from like KNF to JLF. I think more of that's what Kevin's. Would you say you're kind of like I don't know if you'd be like the parade leader, man, but you'd be one of the dudes at the front, like with maybe a couple
Yeah,
other people with that kind of mindset.
yeah, no doubt. JLF just became so simple and basic. It covered all bases. It was all easy to do. There was no measurements. I mean, I've experimented many different ways with different measurements of JLF. Certain amounts, take it to certain ratio levels, just experimenting and see what it does. But I really know now just by eyeballing him, like, need about that much, let's go. And it really does become that easy, and there is no measurements whatsoever. So yeah, the Jadam method, the Jadam method is kind of the fun lifestyle that I like to live, man. I like not spending my money on things that everybody else spends their money on. I want to spend my money on the things that bring me joy. I don't want to have the latest grow pot or the latest pH stick or anything like that. I don't need any of that mess. I want my money spent on things that are going to make me happy. I want to go eat a good meal. That's what I'm going to spend my money on. That's going to bring me a lot more joy than buying some newts or a new grow pot or a new light or anything like that. Although they may be necessary. I do understand that also. I want to try to, when I don't have to spend money on things, I don't want to. And Mother Nature is going to offer you everything that you need if you have the growing environment like I do. Not some people live in apartments, they're not able to do this whole Jadam thing. But when you maybe have a house and kids and you got bills and mortgages and things like that, Jadam is going to sound really good. Although it's a little bit stinky to your wife, she might not like it. Jadam's going to sound really good because it's going to become totally free there.
Yeah.
This next question: have you ever collected tree soil, the very fine particle or sized organic material inside many hollow trees? I'm curious if you or others may know about it. Yeah, man, I got that posted all over my Instagram page. Go check it out, okcalix.com. I even take old fallen trees. I just found a new one today, man, out in the woods. But these old logs that have been there for years and they're wet and they're kind of spongy on top and all that, I just take a machete and just start cutting the very top of it and chopping it all up, slice and dice, and let it sit there over the year. Let it winterize, and that stuff will break down. But naturally, that tree is going to turn into an amazing soil full of biology because the biology is turning that tree into soil. So yeah, any of that tree soil that you can get, it's fantastic. Look underneath, like pull the bark back, and look under. They see a fine dark layer. Oh, that's that good humic material. And then the bark will fall down to the ground. Pull the bark back. Use that as IMO3 material, but then find that good, just dark layer right there on the top. and that is full of microbiology. It's great humic material to make all kinds of things with. But tree soil, yes, sir. Good question. Let's see. Jules rules sail over. Good question.
I will say one thing about foraging though is try to avoid over scavenging a particular area. And Kevin, I've seen on your page that you're even conscious of this too, or you'll leave some there to come back to, where,
Yeah.
if you are going to go out and, look for this tree barks and different things, that's great to go collect a bunch of things from nature. But I don't think that you should completely ravage that environment, you should always try to leave the environment looking a little bit better than you found it if you can. Um, so just be conscious, try not to be too destructive out there.
No doubt.
And
Very
when you're
good.
foraging plants and things, they say like don't take them all, try to leave a couple of them there, or mushrooms and things like that too, not just plants. But so
Let them
I'd
come
practice
back.
the same principle. If you leave a little bit of it there, then that diversity will keep growing and keep thriving and keep working. But if you over scrape it,
Yeah.
then it might not be there next time.
That's right. Take an offering with you. Take a water bottle of JLF or a handful of IMO3, whatever. You pull some mushrooms up, throw it down. That's a fun thing to do. You're giving back.
So, Chris, I think this one was during talking about labs. And we've all made labs, but do you make cheese with your curd?
No, I haven't yet. That's something that I've wanted to do, but I've never done it.
We've had some monster labs orders. Chris, we've shipped like 5 gallons of labs at a time. Chris pumping out labs over there at a crazy rate, probably higher than we wanted, than you probably wanted to. Um, but truly amazing, and that lends your your brewer setup and your brewer mentality lends itself to being able to produce that volume of lactobacillus. It's crazy. But certainly do appreciate you putting out that amazing product, and man, it went to California, I think.
Yeah, well, it was.
So
Yeah, no, I thank
Michigan
everyone
sharing
for
with
the
the country.
support and the feedback of people, and it's something I take tremendous pride in all these practices that I do. Even if I don't talk about them a whole lot, I'll say strategically there is I don't want to over glorify this process that I'm doing and cause too much stress in my life trying to keep up with any sort of specific demands. I like to try to work at a natural pace and keep these systems thriving, and I always say, even in my operation, it's pretty big, but there's a cap to it. And I see the cap, I see the ceiling. And, and that quite frankly, I'm pretty sure that that's where it's going to be. And I'm 100% okay with that. I've just wanted to build up something that I can appreciate. And I'm there, to be honest. So I
Yeah.
thank people for the support, and it's been quite a journey, and overall, I think a lot of people get into this natural farming lifestyle and it just becomes more of your life, and all of a sudden you start being more conscious of other things in your life. And I'm now trying to close loop so many systems that I just didn't see that in my life 10 years ago. But now I'm not doing it out of stress or nothing. It's just like natural goals that I'm very excited about, to see if I can do some of these things. And and how good of a soil I can produce, and how good of inputs, and how good of cannabis can I grow, how good of plants can I grow, each year. I challenge myself to try to keep getting better. And I think everybody else should too, because that's what it's about.
Hell yeah.
Yep.
So last question.
Joy in gardening, it sounds like. Found some joy in that gardening, the fun.
Hell yeah, building a pole barn and a greenhouse soon here. Keeping yourself flat out there, Chris.
Yeah, that's what
All
I
right.
mean. I've got a few things to set up, but once I get this next wheel moving, this wheel that I got going is big enough for me. It's terms of being a massive soil distributor or something like that. I do you move a lot of soil in Michigan, but I've always known that Michigan is a big green thumb type of a state. We got a big grassroots community here, and and I got enough to work with right here in West Michigan, quite frankly. I do get around other areas, but
So last question, Chris might have froze up there, but are you guys concerned about the cicadas at all? I,
yes, I mean, I'm always worried about a massive bug outbreak. I don't know what they're going to do to some of my different leafy greens, and things like that. I don't think I'm so worried about them for my cannabis particularly, but some of the vegetables that I grow, they could do some damage to them. And then I got some fruit trees and things like that that they could do some damage to, and maybe they will do damage to the cannabis. I've never had problems with cicadas in the cannabis, but you know, if they're bad enough, they probably will do some damage. So, anybody else know anything on that?
Yeah, we're getting into a regional discussion on linguistics because depending on what you call a cicada and a locust and a cricket and a grasshopper and all that, a grasshopper here, what we call it, they will chew our plants up. I had this. We've been having to spray already. Freaking larva, caterpillar, something are chewing all my okra plants up, tomato plants, sunflowers. I thought it was a rabbit, and then I found it last night. I found about 3 of them just chomping down, and they can eat one small little plant quite quickly.
Mm.
But those the crickets mess with some people, indoor growers. They'll mess with indoor growers a lot. They like to smell that water indoors, and they'll go to it. And I know because a lot of the growers right here by my house have to deal with crickets all the time. But outdoors, the crickets, the locust, what we call locusts, what some people call cicadas, they don't mess with our plants. But grasshoppers will definitely chow down on a fat, leafy veg plant. No doubt about it.
yeah, I'm not too concerned. I'm more concerned about worms, like Kevin said. I'm not really that concerned about cicadas, but I don't live near a big like wooded area or even a big grass field. I'm in like a suburban setting. Chris, you've been to my house. I'm on like the corner of a suburban neighborhood. Doesn't even make sense that I have Hugo beds in my backyard, and but I love it, and it brings purpose to my suburban house, and I think everybody can do this if they want to close their little loop, however small or big it is. Um, and that's why I love this show, and that's why I really appreciate everybody here is that we all bring a different skill set, different mindset to it, but it's all really the common goal, and it's all really an open discussion of picking what works for you with where you live, like that. Just finding success with what you have and minimalizing, closing the loop on your property or even in your apartment, by starting a compost or worm bin or whatever. um, so we like to keep this. We try to keep this to an hour. It went a little bit over, and it always goes over when it's a compelling conversation. Chris, really appreciate your time, man. Why don't you tell us what's going on? I know you have a big event coming up on your farm. Tell us what's going on, how we can find you, um, anything going on. Shout outs.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very active on my social media pages, particularly Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, I got an event coming up May 18th and 19th. I'm calling it a foraging event. But we got some different people here who are going to help us talk about different aspects of foraging. I'm going to talk about the gardening aspect and what I do to bring things in for my garden inputs and my compost, like we've talked about. But I'm actually going to be able to show people in the process, and we're going to, actually break down some things and start the process on these things and have a hands-on opportunity. And then I got another lady who does a lot of holistic medicines and things like that, and she's going to talk about how she makes holistic medicines out of some of the same things that I do. And then I got a mycologist who's going to talk about mushrooms and different natural mushrooms that he forages for and how he works with those and how those can be utilized. And then we're going to just talk about basic composting and potting strategies. I got a variety of garden projects around here, so it's going to be at my farm. This is the first event that I've held here. I've been kind of, building up, some process. Something that I've wanted to do for a while was kind of open up this operation and let people come in and kind of see what I'm doing here, because I know some people are curious about that. Um, and so that's what I'm going to do. And we'll do that one there. And then at the end of the year, we host a sun grown celebration. And that's going to go on again this year too. So, for people who are growing cannabis outside, we want to have a celebration for that, and we do a competition. So you can enter the competition in a flower or rosin category. It's for organic growers only, and it has to be sun grown. So those are the two main things that we want to look at there. Um, but it's a lot of fun. And this year we're going to make it 2 days. So it'll be like a longer sesh type of a thing. Some people come from out of state and they come in there Friday night looking for something to do. So we decided we'll just rent the club out on Friday and Saturday so that we can have a Friday night sesh and then a Saturday deal as well. And so we also have a big dinner. I always like to do meals of my things. Even my foraging event, I got a good chef here that's going to cook us some food that we cooked from my farm. Some of my chickens and some of my plants. And then I got some other friends that are going to contribute some vegetables and things. So like to bring the farm fresh meal aspect to it and bring these farm fresh discussions into it, because some of the bigger scale natural farmers are really trying to diversify. And, like I say, this is a lifestyle for us, and it's more than just cannabis. This is, an overall health endeavor and, peace with the land, and trying to, have regenerative mindsets and things like that. And in a day when, there's billions of people not living with this type of a mindset, but, the people that do appreciate it find peace and comfort, and some enjoyment, some extra enjoyment around them, in it.
Brian, what's going on in your world, brother? Appreciate you again, Chris. Definitely check them out at countryroots.ltd.com and at Country Roots Ltd on Instagram. That sun grown's sick. I've been to it, competed in it, didn't win, humbled. Moving on.
You did good. I'll say it's a stiff competition. My buddy Lime Rising Farms, Nick, and I, throw that on, and we got a lot of great friends in the state. Are just, phenomenal growers, and there's a variety. Mark, I don't even got to tell you, but just to tell the listeners out there, it's gotten pretty serious now, and now people are kind of like strategically planting their gardens around this sun grown celebration to see like what they can come up with, and so we're trying to bring some interesting aspects of some different genetic types and Michigan breeders and the rosin categories. And so it's a lot of fun, and it brings good joy to our friends through the year to try to work towards these goals. And it is something to be proud of, and you did really good, Mark. Next year I will say, for anybody who does compete, we will have an open voting system. And so we figured out a way that we can have a much better feedback for all the different people. Last year I just did like the top five and notified the top five, and didn't have feedback for everybody because we had a bunch of handwritten scorecards. And quite frankly, the top five takes like 6-7 hours with a couple of people doing it, to really organize that by hand. But we're going to have a much better system. So it'll be cool. Everybody will be able to get some more feedback and see where they stacked up. And we hope, there's not a whole lot of feelings involved in it either. I do want this to be a friendly type of a competition. People see these things how they see them, and some people take it more competitively than others. But overall, we want it to be for the better of the plant. Some of us are growing the same genetics, and so it's just interesting to see, how different profiles and characteristics can come out. And this is how we evolve as a community and keep evolving the plant and finding good, strong medicines, and how we can grow these medicines.
Well said.
Brian, what's going on?
Yeah, so I've been waiting around like 2.5 weeks. My son was supposed to be born a little bit ago. So if nothing happens this weekend, he'll be induced on Monday. Very proud of that, obviously. I think my family is at the top. And because I focused on my family these last few years, I feel like karma has blessed me with having two businesses now. So I have Rubber Ducky Isopods, obviously, and then I have shopterrariumtribe.com as well. where you guys can check out more of the terrariums and vivariums, and just very, very grateful to be able to have the time to do this with you boys and to have the funds and everything to continue to offer free education to the masses.
I'll take next. You can find me at mibeneficials.com. We carry pretty much everything that we can from Chris's offerings. And you can obviously get it through Chris. You can get it through us as well. But really proud to offer Chris's products. I talk about them a lot, and I get a lot of good feedback on them because they are really, really top-notch products with a great backing of purpose and story, and just the whole regenerative thing to me feels good. So being able to offer that to people is really a privilege, and I thank you for that, Chris. And I really appreciate having this show and being able to bring people like you on where we can have these amazing conversations. So just feeling grateful. And yeah, Kev, what's going on with you, brother?
All right, so I've got okcalyxshop.com, got lots of bundles, got lots of genetics. We are doing in the middle of testing a whole lot of new strains, and it's some of them are a collab with me and at Kid Mac on Instagram. Just had lunch with him today. He's popping some of them. I'm popping some of them. We got people on the East Coast, West Coast, everybody popping them, and that's what's exciting about it right now. I'm checking out the plants and seeing what they look like. I'm the one that's had the worst seed results of them all. Everybody else has had great popping results, but I've just been popping mine outside in some soil, and it's been kind of cold at night and then warm in the afternoon. It just got me tricked. I feel like it's warm enough right now to put some seeds in the ground. Cannabis seeds, that is. They always like it a little bit warmer where I am. But so that's fun. That testing's going on. My garden is going to be awesome, I hope. I've got 4 new no-tills that I've been working hard, getting organic material in. And, I'm not expecting great, beautiful, big, fat plants like I have in my other old garden spots, but there's a joy and a fun in participating and trying to make it a new, good soil again, like I did those other spots. It's like, here we go again. Start loading it up with organic material. I mean, that's how easy it is, and that's what I do. Go find it, put it in the garden spot. All we're doing is condensing nutrients down into the small spots we want, grabbing nutrients from all over the field, all over the woods, bringing it back into one small area and condensing all those microbes and nutrients into those small little garden areas and no-tills. That's the idea. But I've got all the things that I use in my gardens and growing, and cannabis growing, vegetable growing, flowers, roses, all that stuff, all the IMOs, all the little inputs I use. It's all on my website. And then one more thing, October 19th here in Oklahoma, me and Jordan with growcastpodcast.com. You can check it out at growcastpodcast.com. I'll be doing an intensive 1 day or 2 day, depending on the package that you buy, just intensive hands-on out in the woods on my land, Tahlequah, Oklahoma, showing you how I would forage things, how I'll process it down, the methods that I use, the inputs that I use. Show you how to make certain inputs. I can't show you how to make all of them, but there'll be very important ones that are common, and kind of show you the idea of closed loop and using things that we find to make more things. The idea of Calyx Organics is to manipulate the microbiome and to make more applications of it, right? By doing that, we manipulate Mother Nature, and then we are able to extract things from that and use it in different methods. So it's a lot of fun, y'all. Organics is fantastic. I can keep on talking forever, but that's going to be going on in that class October 19th. It's going to rock because I'm going to be doing all the teaching. It's going to be fantastic. All right.
Love you guys. Appreciate
Spreading the
everybody.
good word.
Yeah, appreciate everybody's input. And until next week, guys, keep it organic.